Electrocast.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Choosing a bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drink that's all flavor and just 100 calories? Easy. Choosing between creamy vanilla, double chocolate, and sea salt caramel flavors? A little harder. Try the delicious new Starbucks Frappuccino light drinks. Look for them wherever you buy groceries. Start with Starbucks coffee.
Hi, and welcome to Deep Leadership. I'm your host, John Rennie. Well, today we're diving into one of the most overlooked but powerful tools in leadership, your values. I'm joined by Robert MacPhee, a pioneer in value-based leadership. Robert shows us how clarifying your personal values isn't just a feel-good exercise, it's a game-changing strategy for making better decisions, leading with integrity, and building stronger teams. Now, whether you're running a company, a department, a team, or leading yourself, this conversation will challenge the way you think about leadership. So, are you ready to dive in? Let's get started.
Welcome to Deep Leadership, the show built on one simple and powerful truth. Leadership is a people business. If you're ready to become a better boss and a stronger leader, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Today, I'm joined by Robert MacPhee. Robert is the creator of the Excellent Decisions of Values-Based Leadership program and author of Living a Values-Based Life. He is the former director of training for the Canfield Training Group and worked closely for many years with Jack Canfield, the co-creator of the Chicken Soup for the Soul book series and the author of the Success Principles. Robert is a knowledgeable, fun, and engaging speaker and facilitator. He is an expert in experiential learning, peak performance, values clarification, and leadership. I'm excited to have him on the show to learn more about leading with values. So, Robert, welcome to the show.
Thrilled to be here. I love to be introduced at the beginning of a podcast because it makes me realize why I'm so busy all the time. Like all these things I'm trying to do.
Well, you're doing great work. And before we press record, I mentioned we haven't really talked too much about values. And I thought, since you're sort of the values expert, I thought I wanted to get you on to learn a little bit more about values and why they're so important in leadership and in dealing with people. But first of all, tell us how you got started in terms of getting into this leadership development space and working with other leaders and other employees and all that. How did you get into this work?
Well, I think, if I go back far enough, I think the reason I really got into the work is because I found myself being asked to be a leader in the way that many people are. Like, I had a commitment to whatever work I was doing it really well. And sometimes that leads to being put in a leadership position. So it isn't always a good idea because sometimes people don't have the necessary skills and aptitudes for that. But it put me on a path to learn, okay, if I'm going to be asked to be a leader, what does it mean to be a good leader? And then once I got into that environment of learning, I just loved it. A friend of mine and I started a business right out of college, and I kind of became the HR and training part of that. And then I actually sold my interest in the business to get into the training side because I just loved not only specifically in the area of leadership, but just training in general and helping people learn and continue to grow even once they're out of school. It became something that I was just super passionate about, and it felt really on purpose for me. So that's how I ended up kind of transitioning into this whole learning and development area specifically. And a lot of it has to do with leadership.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's good to hear that, it's not just learning for leaders, but also for everyone, the training and development for everyone. I think the idea of leadership and leadership development it needs to happen at all different levels of the organization, not just the upper, not the C-suite. It has to go throughout the entire organization because we all are, in fact, leaders in the organization at some point in time, whether it's on a project or we actually have a formal title. But yeah, so we end up in that space where we end up having to be in charge. So how do you do it?
I totally agree. And I think people at all of those levels that you're talking about, when people are willing to take on even small pieces of leadership, or start looking at themselves as leaders, I don't know that there's any single thing that could have a bigger impact on an organization's culture than if everyone really embraces the idea of being a leader.
Hmm. Yeah, it makes so much sense. So let's talk about values. So lately you've been focusing your effort on talking about values. So set the groundwork for us. What are values? How do we define what a value is?
That's like my favorite thing to hear from somebody. So let's talk about values because my work for the last several years has really, really zeroed in on the importance of values clarification and helping people discover and really live their life and run their business in alignment with their values. And it does start with just what you've asked, like understanding what values are. And in my experience, the good news is it's really very simple. Like our values or our organizational values are what is most important to us. And the values based life work that I do, the approach that we use to help people discover and clarify and live in alignment with their values is a little bit different. But the actual like answer to that question, what are values? In my experience, is very simple. It is what is most important to us. And life is very different when we are very clear about what is most important to us and we start letting the way we think and the decisions that we make and the actions that we're taking be driven by what is most important to us instead of what's most important to someone else, which unfortunately in the crazy world we live in today with media, social media, advertising, friends, family, coworkers, bosses, the whole thing, like it's kind of like everybody wants a little piece and at the end of the day there's not much left over. So, being clear about what's most important to us and let that be in charge is a big life change for a lot of people.
Yeah, like we talked about earlier before I pressed record, is that I left a corporate position because I think that my values either had changed or they the company I work for no longer aligned with my personal values or what was important to me, and so I felt like it was time for me to leave. And so my question to you is like, where do our personal values come from? How do we where do those come from, and do they change over time? I know for me, I think they probably did change over time. As I was younger, I was trying to build a career. When I had children, I was trying to make sure that I could save for college, so I didn't want to lose my corporate job. But as I got older, I really wanted to focus in on myself and what I really wanted to accomplish in my life. So do they change over time? Where do these come from?
Yeah, so it's kind of a two-part question, and I'll start with the second part, which
Yeah.
kind of emphasize like, do they change over time? And I'll start with that because I think it's the easier part, which is yes, absolutely. In my experience, they do change. And I, like you, just take a quick glimpse at different times of my life. I'm almost 65 years old. And if I look back to when I was in high school, I can assure you my values, like what was important to me at that time in my life, was very, very different. And I'm still very actively working and engaged in the work that I do. But if I look ahead and I say, are my values still going to be exactly the same when I decide I want to retire? Did my values change when I had children? Like, yeah, they absolutely do change. And I think that's just a normal part of going through the experience of living a life and running a business and all those kinds of things. I think the trickier part of the question is what you said about like, where do they come from?
Yeah.
And, I said, on the one hand, we don't want other people to be, dictating the way we live our life, the way we think, the way we make decisions. But I do think that's one of the big sources of where our values come from. I could meet you today and I could just be really impressed with your charisma, for instance. And I could say, I want to be more charismatic. And it's
Mhm.
really coming from my experience of connecting with you. So we can look around at the people in our lives and I remember realizing this when I was very young. Like I could look at some of my friends and say, well, I really like this about them. So I kind of want to borrow that. And it doesn't take anything away from them. I want to be kind and caring like that person, but I also really want to be humble the way my dad is or whatever it might be. And so we can kind of pick and choose um, kind of what values we want to adopt and use other people as an example. And I think the second main place that values come from is doing the kind of work that I facilitate where taking a class or taking a workshop or reading a book or whatever it might be, and asking yourself some of these questions that come up in that kind of work about what is most important to me and in what areas of my life and all those kinds of things. So it can be a self-exploration as well as looking at the people around us and kind of picking and choosing.
Yeah, I would imagine that this is, as listeners are listening in, they're probably thinking, "Oh, wow, I haven't really thought about values." I'm sort of, I've got a career, I'm doing what I enjoy, maybe, or maybe this is a stepping stone to the next position I want to get to. But now we're bringing up the idea of values, and they're probably listening to this and say, "Oh, wow, this is really important." So why is it important that we sort of think about and understand what our values are? Why is it important to have that thought process and have that exercise that we actually think about it?
Well, I think the biggest reason why it's super important is because of that dynamic that I described earlier about, my thoughts, my decisions, my actions are either being driven by my own values or they're being driven by all these external influences that we're bombarded with in today's world. And I think most people would agree that they would prefer scenario one. They would prefer as much as possible. We do have to respond to all those things that are going on around us. But the more we can have clarity and be able to articulate what is most important to us so that we get thrown in, when we get thrown into maybe a very emotional situation or a high pressure situation, we have to make a decision, we have to do something, we have to respond. If we've already done the work, if we've already taken the time to clarify what is really important to us, that's going to be there in that moment to support us. And if we haven't done that work in that moment of stress or pressure or a lot of emotion, it's really a terrible time. That's not a time where you want to say, well, let me pause right here and just consider what might my highest. It's not going to happen in that moment.
Yeah.
So having it in your back pocket, literally, to just pull out and have available to you, and to have built a habit, almost like going to the gym and lifting weights. You built a habit of making decisions based on the values that you've decided are most important to you. Then it starts to get easier. Then when you get put in those difficult situations, you really can pause, take a breath and say, okay, I'm going to let my values, I'm going to make this decision based on what is really most important to me, and end up getting more outcomes and more experiences and results that we really want, rather than going, oh, what was I thinking? I really wish I'd done that differently, or why didn't I say this instead of that, what have you. So I think that's the biggest value.
Yeah, and I would imagine if you do this exercise and you understand your values, right, and you have them written down, it sort of makes it a little bit easier. Like you said, you can sort of refer to it when you're making decisions, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to make a decision about my career. What are my values, and what's important to me, and like make sure that you apply that. But I would imagine that even if you haven't done that exercise, you have that uncomfortable when you're in certain situations, you're going to have that uncomfortable feeling when something doesn't feel right. It's
Yes.
misaligned, and like I was telling you about my situation with starting my own company. Was I felt I never had really written down my values, right? But it just felt wrong to me working in big corporations, and I just felt really uncomfortable. I felt like I was doing what I was being asked to do didn't align with what I believed was right, and so I finally just said, enough with this. The only way I'm going to be able to do what's right is to have my own business and do it the way I want to do it. And so, for me, it was. So, do you think that even if you haven't written down, you probably somehow think in the back of your mind, you sort of have an idea of what's important to you, right?
Yes, I totally agree with that. And this physical mechanism that carries us around in the world is really quite uncanny in terms of really like creating that experience of, no, this just isn't right. Like, this doesn't feel right to me. And so I totally agree with you. I think, and I will ask people periodically, or end up in conversations with some of those many, many, many people that you're talking about who just haven't done the work or haven't been
Yeah.
kind of prompted to take the time to really explore this topic of what are my highest values. And so they do have a sense, like people go, well, yeah, I kind of know, but if you gave me a 3x5 card and asked me to write down my top five, I don't have it articulated to that degree.
Hmm.
And I think your question is really profound in the sense that people can probably just tell that there is a fundamental difference between having a sense of what my values are and knowing. Like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I set aside some time, I did some work, I explored this and I've thought about it and I've made choices. Like you mentioned, I spent many years working with Jack Canfield, who wrote a book called The Success Principles. And the number one principle in the book is taking personal responsibility, making choices, reminding ourselves that, hey, it's up to me. Every single day, I make thousands and thousands of choices, and they're all up to me. And if I have a sense of what my values are, and it's kind of directing my choices, that's better than just, going with the wind. But there is something so much more powerful about knowing, hey, I did the work. I asked myself, between A and B, which is more important? And I decided it's A. Now I really know. Like, it's not just a vague sense. Like I've done it. And like we talked about earlier, it might change. Next year, next month, it might be different. But I always know. I mean, since I first really developed this approach where we actually divide values into two separate categories. And so I've had two lists of values for about 12, 13 years, I think it's been. And I have them in my phone and I refer to them all the time. And I remind myself, and they have changed over the years, and I refine them and I reflect. And I have a friend who calls me Mr. Overthinker, but I really look at it in depth because it's like my compass. It's like getting out,
right.
and I'm going to navigate through life. That's my compass. So I think going from that kind of sense of what my values to, no, I've made the decision. These are my values is very powerful to do.
Yeah, so I can definitely see that if you do the hard work and like you said, make those choices, really, hone down that list of what truly is most important to you, it's probably going to help you so much more than if you sort of like I was doing sort of by feeling, so if you do that work, you're going to be much better off. So what's the unique way that you work with people to help them find and clarify those values?
Okay. So the what makes the approach, the values-based life approach
Yeah.
different than other values work that's out there is this concept of two separate categories.
Okay.
And, I tell people I've been doing work in this arena of coaching and consulting and personal and professional development, about 25 years now. I've been doing this work and I really only have three pieces of original content. I have three parts of my work that I can honestly say I can't tell you who I learned it from because it was just one of those divine download kinds of things. And this separation of values into two categories is one of those three things because I was trying to clarify my own values. And to be honest, I just found it confusing.
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
I would, answer the questions and look at the lists and, read the chapter or whatever. And I never came away with something that I really felt was usable, was applicable. I can remember this, I can apply it, it will make a difference in my life. And for whatever reason, I just got like an intuitive sense that if I divided my values into two separate categories, which the two categories we use, the first category is called priorities, which is what is important to me. The areas of my life that I want to be putting time and attention on to create the results and experiences that I really want to be having. So the types of things that show up on my list of priorities are my relationships with my children. Super important to me, something I want to make sure I'm putting time and attention on. So those relationships are really, really good. My health and well-being, which is not just physical health, but mental health and spiritual well-being. I want to make sure I'm putting time and attention on it. So those are the types of things that show up on that list. And then the second list we call ways of being.
Hmm.
And these are like qualities and characteristics. This is how I want to show up in the world. These are adjectives. So for me, a couple things that are on my list are like kindness and caring. I encourage my students to combine, right? Like kindness and caring for me, they kind of go together. They take up one spot on my list. But it's important to me, like in my interaction with you and with everyone today, tomorrow, every day, I want to show up and be kind and caring. That's really important to me. I also want to be humble. Like, I've had the opportunity to learn from some amazing teachers, and yet I want to continue to be a lifelong learner. I don't ever want to be that person who feels like he has all the answers. I want to really hold on to that quality of humility. And what I found was that, the priorities, like my relationship with my children, very important to me. Being kind and caring, also very important to me, but they don't go together. And I think that's where the confusion was coming from. So now the work we do is to help people create two lists. One is your highest priorities. One is the qualities and characteristics that are most important to you. And once you have those, you can at any time in your life look at those lists and say, am I putting my time and attention on the things that are most important to me or not? And usually there's at least a little bit of or not, and you can find areas to put more time and attention on. Again, a conscious choice. And you can also look at how you're showing up in the world. Say, am I being kind and caring? Am I being a lifelong learner, a student, or am I kind of being Mr. Know-it-all? How are we doing on that humility thing? Yeah. And it gives me the opportunity to keep just kind of nudging up a little bit. So I feel like as I navigate through life, every day I'm living my life a little bit more in alignment with what I've declared to be most important to me.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Cadre of Men. Leadership is a people business, and for men, real growth happens alongside those who challenge and inspire you. Cadre of Men is your force multiplier, helping you achieve more strength, deeper connections, and a stronger sense of purpose. I'm proud to call myself a member of this dynamic group. Cadre of Men is built for men who refuse to settle. With dedicated forums covering fitness, fatherhood, business, and more, we provide the tools and camaraderie to help you thrive. Our weekly Zoom calls dive into tough, real-world topics, often featuring expert guest speakers who will push you to sharpen your skills and mindset. Monthly meetups include intense hikes and hands-on building sessions where you forge bonds through shared challenges. From fitness and finance challenges to mastering public speaking, Cadre of Men delivers actionable curriculum in leadership, business, and personal growth. If you're ready to step up, push past your comfort zone, and lead by example, Cadre of Men is for you. Inside the Cadre, we grow together, lead together, and rise together. Visit cadreofmen.com to learn more and take the first step toward becoming your best self. This episode is brought to you by Pharaoh Skincare. I would have never imagined I'd be talking about skincare, but this stuff is truly amazing. Pharaoh is revolutionizing skincare by replacing harmful chemicals with natural ingredients sourced from regenerative farms. Now, weightlifting is tough on the hands, and Pharaoh's Epic Dermis is the best product I've ever used to get my callous hands back to normal and stay in the game. Now I use it every day. Pharaoh also works to reduce fine lines, wrinkles, and improve overall skin health. As Pharaoh CEO Charles Mayfield likes to say, a little Pharaoh goes a long way. Deep Leadership Podcast listeners can save 15% off all of their products by using the code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at pharaoh.life. That's FARROW.life. This episode is brought to you by the Salty Sailor Coffee Company, the official coffee of the Deep Leadership Podcast. Salty Sailor is a veteran-owned coffee brand on a mission to deliver premium, fresh roasted coffee while making a positive impact in the world. Their motto is drink coffee and do good, which reflects their commitment to making amazing coffee and actively supporting the military community. 10% of every order goes to the Navy Marine Corps Relief Society, an organization dedicated to helping sailors, Marines, and their families in times of need. All our listeners get 10% off every order of their amazing coffee by using the discount code DEEP at checkout. So check them out at saltysailorcoffee.com.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit servicenow.com.
Mic check. 1, 2. Are we recording? Hi, I'm Michelle Bernstein, an award-winning chef, restaurateur, and mom. I have a lot on my plate, including my psoriatic arthritis symptoms. That's why I was prescribed Cosentyx. It helps me move better.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for people 2 years of age and older with active psoriatic arthritis. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some were fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your rheumatologist about Cosentyx.
So this is a daily thing. Is it? Do you talk about like having a time where you reflect on these things? Is there, every year should you be looking at this as your values may change throughout the course of your life? How should we be assessing our values once we've figured them out? Once you've got these two categories, right? Our priorities, our ways of being, we sort of understand. And once we've got that set, what should be the time? How often should we reflect on these things?
Okay. So it's a great question. And in my experience, it's a very personal thing. So when I'm working with people, we go through and do a discovery process for what highest priorities are. Then we go through and we do a discovery process for the most important ways of being, which really just sets a baseline for people to then go into a process of continuing to reflect and think there's something they want to add, something they want to take away, some language they want to change, whatever it is. But for me, the most important thing is for people to keep it in the foreground. So I will tell people, I told you, I have this in my phone. I have a little alert that goes off on my phone. One of those external influences that sometimes doesn't work in our favor. This one works in my favor. I get a little red dot on my phone every day, and I open up this little reminders app that I have, and it takes me like 2 minutes. And I just scroll through, and I say, how am I doing? Just keep it, I call it in the foreground. Because unfortunately, what happens for most people, and not just with values work, but personal growth work, leadership training, whatever it is, so often what happens is, great workshop, amazing facilitator, that was great, I loved it. And then 2 weeks later, if we go in and say, well, how's it going? What difference did it make?
Yeah.
Well, I remember, great facilitator, we had a great time, it was really engaging, but I don't know, what did I actually do? Nothing.
Yeah.
And part of my commitment, I think I really learned this from Jack, because he shares his commitment, like let's teach this, let's share it in a way that it really makes a difference in people's lives. So we have the exploration of priorities and ways of being, that then the follow-up is an implementation strategy to teach people a way of looking at those lists, assessing how we're doing now, and making some choices about what we'd like to do a little bit differently. Generally, most of the time we don't have to turn the whole thing upside down and, do everything differently. But, if I say, gosh, top of my list, relationship with the kids, I haven't talked to my daughter in a week, I'm going to pick up the phone and call her.
Yeah.
It can literally be that simple. So that implementation piece is huge. And in answer to your question, it's not like, okay, you need to look at this every day, you need to have it in this form. I really want to, I give people all sorts of suggestions for ways that they can do it. We can do it on our computer. We can do it on our phone. You can put them on a 3x5 card and put it on your nightstand. There's no shortage of ways to keep it in the foreground. But yes to the foreground, no to the background, because that happens too often.
Yeah, I can see that. It's very important that we, keep in the foreground, and it becomes part of our, like you said, sort of your daily ritual, if you will, or it's just a reminder, of what's important. And so are you living, towards those things that are most important to you?
And unfortunately for individuals and organizations, we see this, and you're doing work in the area of leadership, you're working with leaders, you probably have worked with organizations and leaders that have done values work. But unfortunately, a lot of the values work is either in a folder or in a drawer somewhere, not making a difference.
Yeah.
Or, and in my opinion, this is even worse, it's up on the wall and it's, there's a beautiful plaque, and every single day people are not living and operating in alignment with those values. So it can actually be doing more harm than good that you've got that beautiful plaque on the wall about what we say we do, but it's not actually what the people in your organization know we actually do.
Yeah, that's kind of important. I think one of the things that we've talked a lot on this show about culture and the organizational culture and why it's so important. And one of the areas that affects culture a lot is stating what your values are, but also more importantly is that living in accordance with those values. So it's one thing to have a personal value statement that you can sort of check in on, right? But as a leader, once you've established the values for what you want to see in your organization, as soon as someone steps outside those values, right, and does something that's sort of in violation of those values, if you don't act on that, if you don't make that shift and recognize that's a problem and you have to address it, then that becomes your new values, right? So regardless of what you have written down, it's the leader's actions will sort of impact what the real living values are in the organization. I think that's why I think when it comes to organization, like we have our values listed down there, and I'm very attentive towards making sure that we are living in accordance with those organizational values. That's my job as the leader, right? Because it massively affects our culture if I don't live accordance with those values. So when you go from like the personal values to the organizational values, there's a little more effort on the part of the leader at that point to make sure that they're monitoring the situation to make sure that actions are consistent with values?
Well, that's, I think, a really important element of it. But one of the, I think, really eye-opening and interesting things that I learned getting into more of this values work, and it was surprising to me on the organizational side, is that the research shows there's multiple studies that I've come across. I've never been able to find a study that measures how few people can actually articulate their own values. I've never been able to find a number for that. But there's actually really good research on the organizational side that, most people can agree. We would want the organizational values to align with the personal values of the people in our organization, and that would be a really powerful, positive impact on culture. Pretty obvious, right? But I think what most people think is that the emphasis should be on clearly articulating and sharing the organizational values. But what the research actually shows is that the best thing an organization or a leader in an organization can do to create that kind of culture where there's alignment is to support the people, the employees, the frontline people, the middle managers, all those people in the organization, to support them in discovering what their own highest values are so that they can then look at the organizational values through that filter of knowing whether they align or not.
Yeah.
And sometimes managers and leaders are reluctant to do that because they're like, well, what if I lose my people? What if they discover their values and they decide they don't want to work here? And my answer to that is usually answering a question with a question and say, well, if their values don't align with your values, do you really want them working here? Like, who is that working for?
Yeah.
So I found that really interesting, and I have worked with several companies to start with helping the people on the front lines to clarify their values themselves and then look at the organizational values. And I've had the exact experience that research shows. It has an incredible positive impact on culture. And you might lose a few people here and there, but just the act that you're working for a company that came to you and said, I want to help you clarify what your values are so that you really know that this is a great place for you to be working. And I already know this is a great place that I want to be working because you just did that. Like, it's such a compelling statement about, it's like you were saying, it's living the values, it's acting into the values rather than just putting them on the wall.
Well, I think, just from my own personal perspective, and if I, observe my employees, I think when there's consistency with what they believe is important in their lives and what the company feels is important, when those are aligned, they have more joy, right? They like coming to work. They're doing what they've been put on earth to do, and it's consistent with them. And I find the employees that sort of get cross-threaded with the organization, there's probably some misalignment there somewhere. For example, we're a small company. There's not a lot of international travel. There's not a lot of ways to move up 3 or 4 levels in the organization because there's only 2 levels, right? So if what's important to you is moving up in the organization and getting a fancy title or maybe a corner office, this isn't the company for you, right? We don't have those, we don't have that ability now. But if this is something, that where you want to be part of something, growing something from the ground up and building something that's never, doing things that have never been done before, this is the place to be, So I think you're right. I think when there's alignment, you get more energized employees, more, the morale is higher. They like to come into work. They're doing things that are important in their lives. And when it's misaligned, you can feel it. You can sense it. You can see it.
Yeah, for sure. And you described the experience of joy that comes from that. The other experience that comes from that is a sense of purpose and meaning. People want to go to work, and they're there to get a paycheck, and that's an important element. But I think especially with this younger generation, they want to know they're doing something that makes a difference. They want to be creating meaning and making a contribution in the world. And my very first work experience out of college was a friend of mine and I starting a valet parking company. And it was not like, it's kind of like what you're describing, it wasn't like a, multi-layered and all the, these promotions and everything. And, we were just parking cars. I mean, like purpose and meaning, I don't really know. But there was a point where we realized most of our clients when we first started were restaurants. And we realized that as a valet parking company, we were taking responsibility for the first and last impression of that restaurant's customer. So no matter how good a job they did with greeting people and serving people and preparing great food and all this stuff, if we screwed it up, either on the way in, then they'll never catch up, or on the way out after they did all that work, we could ruin it. And this was long before I was doing values work, but I remember that moment of bringing that element of purpose and meaning to parking a car. Like this is the first and last impression. That restaurant owner has mortgaged his house, and I mean, that is such a hard business, and they're doing everything they possibly can to make this work and make it a really quality experience. And I took that so seriously. Like, I am not going to screw that up for them. And it was a whole different level of like the way I was approaching my work.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story. I love that idea of, really understanding what it is you're doing that's so important, and I think having that clarification sort of helps you recognize, oh, I better not screw up, right? This is that important, right? So, what, as you've clarified your values, as you've lived accordance with your values in your life and the life of other people that you've helped do this, what can people who do this, what can they expect? What differences does it make in people's lives if they're living according to their values?
Well, we've touched on some of them already, in terms of talking about the way we think and the decisions that we make and the actions that we're taking. Especially, I think the most noticeable one is the decision making, the ability to be making decisions with more clarity and more quickly and easily as a result of having that ability to clearly articulate what our highest values are. And I think the other thing, we just talked about this, is more of a sense of purpose and meaning, because it's our values that will ultimately define, for your sense of purpose and meaning might come from a different place. Your values might be slightly different. So your sense of what really gives you purpose and meaning might be a little bit different than mine. But yours is going to be driven by your values, defined really by your values, and mine will be defined by my values. And the other thing that I think is a little bit of not really a secret, I wouldn't call it, but maybe a little bit more surprising for people, is that when we get really clear about what our highest values are, we start putting our time and attention on the things that are most important to us. And we get more of a sense of productivity. And I say a sense of productivity because productivity to me comes from a combination of what we're getting done and the importance of what we're getting done. So I might get a whole bunch of little stuff on my to-do list done today, but it might not really be the most important things that are there for me to get done. So I'm not really going to feel that sense of true productivity. And I might have another day where I just get one thing done, but it's right there at the top of my values list. It's right, the most important thing. And I said no to those other things. And I said, today's the day I'm getting this done because it's important to me. And that's the day that I'm really going to feel productive. So not just purpose and meaning, but really feeling productive comes from clarifying values as well.
I love it. This is so important. And I'm glad that you've brought this up to us and helped us think through these things, because I think it's really a big issue. And again, it can lead to a lot less stress in our lives if we figured out like what's really important to us in doing those things, right? I think there's joy to be found in doing that. So, Robert, what final message would you like to leave with our listeners?
Well, I was so thrilled to be contacted by you and invited to be here today. And part of that was because you focus so much on leadership. And I think if I was to leave like one message, it would be that this work on values, the ability to be really clear and able to articulate your values, in my experience, that makes you a leader. Like no matter what your title is, no matter how many people are on your team or supposedly following you, like if you truly are clear about what is most important to you and you are living your life, running your business, showing up every day in alignment with those values, you are a leader, because all those other people that are following those external influences and being pushed this way and that way, they're following. And again, I think, and I have a values bias, but in my experience, people who have clearly articulated what their values are leaders. Like literally for me, it's like by definition, because you're not following, you are leading. And, you can look over your shoulder and check and see if anyone's following.
Yeah.
But the truth is you're a leader. And I do think, when you start showing up like a leader, even if you are the receptionist and not the CEO, you're going to find that you're the person within the organization who gets invited to take on more responsibility and gets more opportunities and all that as a result.
I think people take notice. I think people take notice if you're not just swayed by every, thing that's happening in social media or the news, and you're just sort of, you're focused on what's important.
You will become unique. Yes.
You become unique.
So I think, so many people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's such an important message. Well, Robert, this has been fantastic. How can our listeners find out more about you, this book, and your company?
The simplest way to do that is to go to our website, which is valuesbasedlife.com. Oops, my little earphone just fell out, so I can't hear anymore. There we go. But yeah, valuesbasedlife.com. There's information about the book and the other work that we do. I'm not one of these people who has 27 gatekeepers, so if you want to get through to me, there's a place on the website you can set up a consultation and talk to me about what really piqued your curiosity from this conversation. And I'm on a mission to help as many people as possible to get to this place where they really are clear and can articulate their values because of all the benefits that we've talked about. So would love to engage with any of your listeners. And thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation.
Well, absolutely. And listeners, we're going to put links in the show notes for all of Robert's resources. And I highly do encourage you, if something about our conversation really struck a nerve and you're thinking, wow, I have not really thought about values before. And I remember maybe I do feel like my values are not aligned with the jobs that I'm doing right now. And so Robert is the expert. And so I highly recommend you reach out to him, follow the links in the show notes below, reach out to Robert, ask him a question. He's got a process for uncovering your values. We talked about these two different categories. And there's a lot more work there in his book and on his website. So I highly encourage you to follow up with Robert and explore the area of values, because I think it's really important in leadership and in your life in general. So, Robert, I want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge on this very important topic.
You're welcome. I'm thrilled to have the opportunity, and it was great to connect with you.
Well, thanks again. Well, that is it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.
Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. For more information and updates, please visit our website at johnsrennie.com.